The crystal chandelier cast dancing shadows across the mahogany dining table as I watched my sister Elena raise her champagne flute for what felt like the 100th toast of the evening. Our parents' 35th anniversary celebration was in full swing, complete with hired violinists and enough flowers to stock a funeral home. I sat in my usual spot, close enough to the kitchen to help serve, far enough from the center to remain invisible. But before I tell you how this evening changed everything, let me ask, where are you watching this story from? If you're enjoying these tales of family secrets and finding your voice, I'd love to hear from you in the comments below. And if you want more stories like this every day, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for daily inspiration. Elena's latest triumph involved landing a contract with some boutique hotel chain for her interior design firm. Dad beamed with pride while Mom nodded along, her smile practiced from years of celebrating other people's victories. The guests, mostly Dad's business associates and Mom's book club friends, hung on every word as Elena described her vision and artistic breakthrough. And the best part, Elena continued, her voice carrying across the dining room, is that they want me to design 3 more locations. This could really put Gilded Interiors on the map. I took another sip of my wine, the same budget bottle I'd brought while Elena had arrived with a case of imported champagne that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. Not that anyone noticed the difference between her offering and mine. My contribution had been quietly absorbed into the evening like everything else I provided. The irony wasn't lost on me. Gilded Interiors existed because of a loan I'd co-signed 3 years ago when Elena was drowning in startup costs. But tonight, like every other night, that detail had been smoothed over, forgotten in the warm glow of her success story. "Mia's been so quiet tonight," Mom suddenly announced, her attention turning to me like a spotlight I didn't want. "How's the nonprofit work going, honey?" The question felt obligatory, a polite pit stop before the conversation could return to more interesting topics. I managed to smile. "It's good. We just secured funding for the literacy program expansion." "How wonderful," Mom said, though her eyes had already begun to drift back toward Elena, who was now describing her meeting with some celebrity client. I'd spent the last 6 months writing grant proposals and organizing community outreach programs, work that actually changed lives in our city of Portland. But somehow Elena's hotel lobby designs seemed to carry more weight at family gatherings. Perhaps because her work came with a glamorous lifestyle and Instagram-worthy behind-the-scenes content, while mine came with early mornings at community centers and endless paperwork. Dad cleared his throat, signaling another toast. "To Elena," he said, raising his glass high, "for showing us all what determination looks like." The words stung more than they should have. Determination. As if I hadn't worked 3 jobs through college while Elena sailed through art school on the scholarship money that was supposed to be mine. As if I hadn't given up my graduate program in social work to help keep Dad's architecture firm afloat during the recession. As if every major financial crisis in this family hadn't been quietly resolved with money transferred from my steadily growing savings account. But I raised my glass along with everyone else, because that's what I did. I smiled and nodded and played my role as the reliable one, the steady one, the one who could always be counted on to understand. Elena's husband, Marcus, leaned back in his chair with the satisfied expression of someone who had married well. "You know what they say about successful women," he said with a chuckle. "Behind every great designer is a great family supporting her dreams." The comment hit differently than he intended. Yes, there had been support, but it hadn't come from family encouragement or connections. It had come from my bank account, quietly and without fanfare, because Elena had needed, quote, "just a small loan," that turned into a major investment, that turned into a business partnership I was never acknowledged for. I watched Elena laugh at something one of the guests said, her hand gesturing elegantly as she spoke. She wore confidence like an expensive perfume, and I wondered when I had stopped believing I deserved to feel that way too. When had I accepted that my role was to enable other people's dreams, rather than pursue my own? The evening continued around me, conversations flowing like the wine I kept refilling for everyone else. Stories were shared, jokes were told, and memories were crafted that would be repeated at future gatherings. But as I sat there, surrounded by family and friends, I felt more invisible than ever. Later, as the guests began to leave, and the hired help started cleaning up, I found myself alone in Dad's study, looking at the framed photos covering his desk. There we were through the years, family vacations, graduations, holidays. In almost every picture, Elena stood front and center while I lingered at the edges, smiling but somehow separate from the main event. It would be another 2 hours before the evening took its final turn, before the conversation that would change everything. But sitting there in that quiet room, surrounded by evidence of a lifetime of stepping aside, I felt something shift inside me. A small crack in the foundation of who I thought I was supposed to be. The sound of laughter drifted in from the dining room, and I knew I should rejoin the celebration. After all, that's what I did. I showed up, I supported, I smiled. But for the first time in years, I found myself wondering what would happen if I didn't. I was 15 when I first understood that money could sound like thunder in the walls of our house. The sound came from behind Dad's office door. Mom's voice, higher than usual, tight with worry. The Morrison contract fell through, David. The bank called about the line of credit. I pressed my ear closer to the heavy oak door, my heart hammering against my ribs. Dad's architecture firm had been struggling for months, though they'd tried to hide it behind forced smiles and conversations that stopped whenever I entered a room. But teenagers noticed things. The way bills stayed unopened on the kitchen counter longer than usual. How Mom had started clipping coupons for the first time in my memory. That afternoon, I walked to Riverside Books, where I'd been working weekends since turning 14. Mrs. Chen, the owner, let me shelve returns and organize the children's section for $8 an hour. It wasn't much, but I'd been saving every penny in a coffee tin, hidden behind my winter coats. The bookstore smelled like old paper, and the lavender tea Mrs. Chen brewed in her office. It was quiet that day, just a few customers browsing the mystery section while rain drummed against the windows. I counted and recounted the money in my tin during my break, $640 in crumpled bills and coins. 3 months of weekend work, plus birthday money from Grandma Rose. That evening, I slipped the envelope under Dad's office door while he was at his drafting table, hunched over blueprints with his reading glasses sliding down his nose. I didn't knock. I didn't denounce myself. I just left the money and went to my room, my heart pounding like I'd done something wrong instead of something right. He never said thank you. The next morning at breakfast, he ruffled my hair and called me dependable. Mom smiled that watery smile she wore when she was trying not to cry. Elena, who was home from her first semester at Pacific Arts Institute, barely looked up from her organic granola. 2 weeks later, Elena got a brand new Toyota for her 18th birthday, powder blue with heated seats and a sunroof that she immediately declared absolutely perfect. She squealed when she saw it in the driveway, jumping up and down like she was still 10 years old. Dad filmed everything on his phone while Mom wiped happy tears from her eyes. I watched from my bedroom window, still wearing my Riverside Books apron from my Saturday shift. Nobody mentioned the envelope. Nobody connected my empty coffee tin to Elena's full gas tank. The math was invisible to everyone but me. By 17, I had perfected the art of strategic invisibility. I worked at both the bookstore and a coffee shop downtown, covering shifts for college kids who needed weekends free for parties and dating. I gave Dad $300 when his computer crashed, and he needed new drafting software. I paid for Mom's prescription glasses when insurance only covered the basic frames. I slipped Elena gas money when she came home complaining about being totally broke after buying vintage designer jeans. They called me responsible, mature, the one they could count on. But never by my name when they bragged to their friends. And certainly never with the kind of pride they reserved for Elena's art exhibitions and Dean's List achievements. Elena graduated from Pacific Arts Institute with honors and a portfolio that Dad had professionally framed and hung in his office. She'd majored in interior design with a minor in art history, funded by a combination of student loans, part-time gallery work, and what she cheerfully called family support. I graduated from Roosevelt High with a 4.2 GPA and acceptance letters to 3 universities, including Oregon State, with a partial scholarship for social work. I remember sitting on the back porch with the OSU acceptance letter, reading it over and over until the words blurred. Full ride for the first 2 years, work-study opportunities, a chance to study community development, and maybe even get my master's degree. It was the first thing in my life that was entirely mine, earned through my own grades, my own essays, my own dreams of working with underserved communities. But Elena's post-graduation plans had hit a snag. Her student loans were in deferment, but her credit card debt wasn't. She owed money on art supplies, portfolio printing, interview outfits, and the security deposit on a studio apartment in the Pearl District that she claimed was essential for networking. She'd applied for several design positions but hadn't heard back yet, and the minimum payments on her credit cards were already more than she could handle with her part-time gallery job. Dad sat me down in his office on a Thursday evening in late April, the same office where I'd slipped that first envelope 3 years earlier. His drafting table was cleaner now, business picking up after the recession, but his expression was serious. "Family helps family, Mia," he said, his hands folded on the desk between us. "Elena's in a tight spot, and you've always been good with money. She needs about $4,000 to get back on her feet, clear the credit cards, make her apartment deposit. It's temporary." The OSU letter was in my backpack, along with the financial aid paperwork I'd been planning to submit. $4,000 was exactly what I had saved for my first year's expenses: textbooks, meal plans, emergency fund, money I'd earned through 2 years of double shifts and careful budgeting. I didn't fight. I didn't argue. I transferred the money into Elena's account that same night and sent my regrets to Oregon State the next morning. I enrolled at Portland Community College instead, planning to work my way through a 2-year degree before transferring somewhere more affordable. Elena moved into her Pearl District studio and landed her first design internship 2 months later. She sent thank you texts that were heavy on emoji and light on specifics about repayment. By Christmas, the $4,000 had become a forgotten loan, and Elena was posting Instagram stories from trendy restaurants and weekend trips to Seattle. At Elena's internship completion celebration, held at an upscale restaurant downtown, she gave a speech about perseverance and following your dreams. The key, she told the assembled family and friends, is to never give up. Even when things get tough, you just have to believe in yourself and work harder than everyone else. I smiled and clapped. Along with everyone else, my community college textbooks still warm in my backpack from my evening statistics class. Later, when the waiter brought the check, I quietly slipped him my credit card before anyone could see the total. Elena's celebration dinner cost more than I made in a week at both my jobs combined. But I paid it anyway, because that's what family did. That's what I did. I showed up, I smiled, and I made sure everyone else's dreams had room to breathe, even when mine were slowly suffocating in the space between what I wanted and what was expected of me. The rain had started again by the time I got home that night, drumming against my bedroom window like it had 3 years earlier when I first learned that love could sound like an empty coffee tin and feel like an unsigned thank you note. By 21, I had mastered the economics of being invisible. I graduated from Portland Community College with honors and a degree in business administration. Practical, Dad called it, though he said it with less enthusiasm than when he talked about Elena's artistic vision. I'd transferred to Portland State for my bachelor's, working full-time at a nonprofit called Bridge Communities while taking evening classes. Elena's design career was flourishing, or at least, that's what her Instagram suggested. Her feed was a carefully curated collection of fabric swatches, mood boards, and artfully arranged coffee cups in expensive cafes. She'd moved into a larger studio and hired an assistant, though she still called me every few months with what she termed cash flow challenges. The pattern was always the same: late-night phone calls, usually when I was already in bed with a textbook or budget spreadsheet. Her voice would be bright, almost aggressively cheerful, as if enthusiasm could disguise the fact that she was asking me to solve problems she'd created. "Mia, how's my favorite sister? I'm your only sister, Elena. Details." She'd laugh, and I could hear traffic in the background, probably walking to her car after dinner at another restaurant I couldn't afford. "Listen, I have this amazing opportunity, but I need to front some money for materials. It's this tech startup's new offices. Glass walls, minimalist everything. Totally my aesthetic. But they want to see samples before they commit, and high-quality samples aren't cheap. $2,000 for fabric samples and mood board materials. It's basically guaranteed, Mia. They love my portfolio. This could be the contract that puts gilded interiors on the map. I was staring at my laptop screen, working on a grant proposal for after-school programs, when she called. The application was due at midnight, and I'd been fighting with budget projections for 3 hours. Outside my small apartment, Portland's winter rain tapped against the windows like impatient fingers. I don't have $2,000 just sitting around, Elena. Come on, you're so good with money. You probably have way more than that saved up. Her voice carried that edge it got when she wasn't getting what she wanted immediately. Besides, you never spend money on anything fun. When's the last time you bought yourself something nice? I looked around my apartment. Secondhand furniture, library books stacked on a folding table, walls decorated with free prints from the nonprofit's awareness campaigns. She wasn't wrong about my spending habits, but she also didn't understand that my idea of something nice was having 3 months of rent saved in my emergency fund. I can lend you $500, I said finally. The silence stretched long enough that I wondered if the call had dropped. Then, $500 won't even cover the fabric for the reception area, Mia. This is important. It's my career. And this is my emergency fund. $500 is what I can do. She sighed, the sound heavy with disappointment. Fine, but I'll need it by tomorrow. They want the samples by Friday. I transferred the money that night, watching my savings account balance drop, while Elena probably slept peacefully, already mentally redecorating the tech office. The startup never called her back. 2 months later, I saw their new space featured in Portland Monthly, designed by a firm I'd never heard of. Elena's next crisis came 6 months later, during what she called a temporary setback. She'd hired too many contractors for a residential project, overestimating both the timeline and her client's patience. When the homeowners demanded revisions she couldn't afford, she was stuck with bills for work that couldn't be undone, and a client who refused to pay the full balance. I just need enough to cover payroll, she said over lunch at a cafe near my office. She'd suggested meeting for sister time, but I could see the envelope on the table between us before she'd even ordered her quinoa salad. $1,800. That's it. I can't let my contractors think I'm unreliable. I was eating a $5 sandwich I'd brought from home, having already spent my weekly dining out budget on groceries. Elena's salad cost more than I'd budgeted for food that entire day, but she ordered it without checking the price, the way people do when they assume someone else might be paying. Elena, I gave you $500 in January. What happened to paying me back? She waved her hand dismissively. I'm still waiting on that tech contract to come through. Plus, I've been investing in the business. New computer, software licenses, marketing materials. You know how it is. I didn't know how it was. I knew how it was to save for months, to replace my laptop when it finally died. I knew how it was to use free software and design my own business cards at the print shop, where I got a discount for bulk orders. But I didn't know how it was to spend money I didn't have on things I couldn't afford, and then expect other people to solve the math problem. But I gave her the $1,800 anyway, because the alternative was watching her business fail, and nobody in our family seemed prepared for that conversation. Dad would have been disappointed, Mom would have worried, Elena would have blamed everyone but herself, and somehow it would have been my fault for not preventing it. At Elena's wedding 2 years later, I paid the deposit on the reception venue, a temporary loan, to help them secure their dream location when Marcus's best man backed out of his co-signer commitment. The venue was a restored historic mansion with crystal chandeliers and a string quartet, the kind of place that charged corkage fees that exceeded my monthly entertainment budget. I sat at the family table during the reception, watching Elena dance with Marcus under lights that I'd helped make possible. Dad's toast was about love conquering all obstacles, and Mom cried happy tears while filming everything on her phone. Nobody mentioned the obstacles that had been conquered with money transferred from my checking account at 11 p.m. on a Tuesday night when Elena realized the venue needed payment to hold their date. The wedding favors were miniature succulents in hand-painted pots, each one tied with a ribbon that read, "Love grows here." Elena had designed them herself, she announced during her speech, though I recognized the ceramic pots from the art supply store, where I'd helped her carry 15 boxes to her car the week before. As the evening wound down, and guests began to leave, Elena found me near the gift table, still wearing her reception dress, but with her hair slightly mussed from dancing. "Mia, you're the best sister ever," she said, hugging me with arms that smelled like champagne and the expensive perfume Marcus's mother had given her. "I know I've been scattered lately with wedding planning and everything. Once things settle down, we'll figure out all the money stuff, okay?" I nodded and smiled, because that's what I did. I hugged her back and told her she looked beautiful and that Marcus was lucky to have her. I didn't mention that all the money stuff had reached nearly $8,000 over 3 years, or that I'd been tracking every transaction in a spreadsheet that I updated religiously but never showed anyone. Later that night, I sat in my apartment still wearing my bridesmaid dress, looking at the numbers on my laptop screen. $8,000. Enough for a decent used car, or a graduate program, or the first and last month's rent on a better apartment. Instead, it had been transformed into Elena's security deposits and contractor payments and emergency funds that were never quite emergencies for anyone but me. But Elena was happy, and her business was growing, and our parents were proud. The wedding photos would show a perfect day, and nobody would remember the small financial crises that had threatened to derail it. My contribution would become invisible again, absorbed into the family narrative like everything else I provided. I closed the laptop and went to bed, my bridesmaid dress carefully hung in the closet next to my work clothes. Tomorrow I would go back to writing grant proposals and managing nonprofit budgets, making other people's dreams possible with careful planning and strategic frugality. It was what I was good at. It was what I was for. But lying in the dark, listening to the rain that seemed to follow every major family celebration, I wondered when I had stopped believing that my dreams deserved the same careful attention I gave to everyone else's. The call came on a Thursday night in September, just as I was settling into bed with a cup of chamomile tea and a book about community organizing. I'd had a long day at Bridge Communities, working on budget projections for our youth mentorship program, and my brain was finally beginning to unwind when my phone lit up with Elena's name. I let it ring twice, savoring the last moments of peace before answering. "Mia, thank God you picked up." Elena's voice was strained, higher than usual. "I'm in serious trouble." I sat up straighter, tea forgotten. "What kind of trouble?" "The Hartwell project is falling apart. You remember? The downtown loft renovation I've been working on for 6 months? They're threatening to pull out completely, unless I can fix the kitchen disaster by Monday." I did remember the Hartwell project. Elena had been posting about it constantly. Exposed brick walls, industrial lighting, a kitchen island that cost more than I made in 3 months. It was supposed to be her breakthrough project, the one that would establish Gilded Interiors as a serious player in Portland's competitive design market. What happened? The contractor I hired turned out to be completely incompetent. The custom cabinets don't fit. The countertops are the wrong color, and there's some issue with the electrical work that means everything has to be torn out and redone. Her voice cracked slightly. I fired him, but now I'm stuck with his mess and a client who's ready to sue me for breach of contract. I pulled my laptop onto my bed, already knowing where this conversation was heading. "How much?" $25,000. I know it sounds like a lot, but $25,000? I nearly choked on the number. "Elena, that's more than I make in 8 months. I know, but if I don't fix this, the Hartwells will ruin my reputation. They know everyone in Portland's design community. This could destroy everything I've built." I stared at my laptop screen, my banking app still open from earlier when I'd been reviewing my budget. My savings account balance stared back at me, $31,847. 5 years of careful living, side jobs, and every tax refund I'd ever received. "I don't have $25,000 lying around, Elena." "But you have investments, right? And your retirement account?" "You're always talking about being responsible with money." The assumption in her voice, that my financial stability existed for her convenience, made my chest tighten. "Those aren't emergency funds for your business mistakes." "Business mistakes?" Her tone shifted, becoming sharp. "This isn't a mistake, Mia. This is sabotage. That contractor lied about his qualifications, used substandard materials, and left me holding the bag. I'm the victim here. I closed my eyes, recognizing the familiar pattern. Elena's problems were never her fault. They were the result of incompetent contractors, unreasonable clients, or bad luck. She was always the victim, never the person who had hired the cheap contractor without checking references, or promised timelines she couldn't meet, or spent the client's deposit on other projects. What about Marcus? Can't he help? Marcus is tapped out, his marketing firm is struggling, and we just bought the house. Besides, this is my business. I need to handle it myself. But she wasn't handling it herself. She was asking me to handle it, the same way she'd asked me to handle every financial crisis for the past 7 years. The difference was the scale. $25,000 wasn't a temporary loan or a small favor. It was my entire safety net. Elena, I can't. That money is everything I have saved. The silence stretched long enough that I wondered if she'd hung up. Then, quietly, "So you're going to let my business fail?" "I'm not letting anything fail. I'm just not in a position to." "You live in a studio apartment, Mia. You drive a car that's older than some of my clients' kids. You never go anywhere, never buy anything, never do anything fun. What exactly are you saving all that money for?" The question hit harder than it should have. What was I saving for? Graduate school, maybe, though I'd been saying that for 3 years. A house down payment in Portland's impossible market. Retirement, though that felt abstract and distant. Security, mainly the peace of mind that came from knowing I could survive if something went wrong. I'm saving it for emergencies. This is an emergency. No, Elena, this is your emergency. There's a difference. She was quiet for a moment, and when she spoke again, her voice had taken on the wounded tone she used when she wasn't getting her way. "I can't believe you're being so selfish. Family is supposed to help family." The word selfish hit like a physical blow. Selfish. After 7 years of loans that became gifts, deposits that became donations, and emergency assistance that became expected support. After giving up Oregon State, working extra shifts to cover her wedding venue, and quietly subsidizing her dreams while mine collected dust. I've helped you plenty, Elena. When was the last time you paid me back for anything? I always pay you back eventually. Name one time. Another silence. I could hear traffic in the background. Probably her driving home from some client meeting or networking event that had cost more than my weekly grocery budget. "Look," she said finally, "I'll sign something official this time. A promissory note with interest and everything. You'll get every penny back plus extra." I wanted to believe her. Part of me always wanted to believe that this time would be different, that Elena would finally recognize the weight of what she was asking. But I'd heard variations of this promise before, and they all ended the same way, with my bank account lighter and Elena's problems temporarily solved until the next crisis emerged. "I can lend you $5,000, I said finally. "That's what I can afford without touching my long-term savings. $5,000 won't even cover the electrical work." "Then you need to find another solution." "What other solution?" "You're my only option, Mia. Everyone else has already told me no." The admission hung in the air between us. Everyone else had already told her no. Her husband, presumably. Her friends, maybe. The bank, certainly. I was the last resort. The person who could always be counted on to say yes when everyone else had the sense to walk away. "I'm sorry, Elena. I really am. But I can't do it." She hung up without saying goodbye. I sat in my dark apartment for a long time after that, my laptop still open to my banking app, the numbers glowing in the blue light. $31,000. It represented every sacrifice I'd made, every Friday night I'd stayed home, every vacation I hadn't taken, every impulse purchase I'd resisted. It was my freedom, my security, my future. But it was also just numbers on a screen, while Elena's panic had been real and immediate. Her business, her reputation, her marriage, everything she'd built was potentially crashing down around her, and I had the power to stop it. I closed the laptop and tried to sleep, but my mind kept circling back to that word. Selfish. Was I being selfish? Or was I finally being smart? Was there a difference between self-preservation and selfishness? Or was that just something people told themselves when they didn't want to help? By morning, I still didn't have an answer. But I did have a decision. I would not be giving Elena $25,000. For the first time in 7 years, I was going to let her figure it out on her own. I just hoped I was strong enough to stick to it. The fallout from my refusal came in waves, each one more desperate than the last. First, there were the texts, short, clipped messages that arrived at all hours. Contractor wants payment by Friday. Client threatening legal action. Can't sleep, everything falling apart. Then came the phone calls. Elena's voice grew more strained with each conversation, the confident designer persona cracking to reveal something raw and panicked underneath. She'd found a new contractor, she said, someone who could fix the Hartwell project, but he wanted half the money up front. Just $15,000, she pleaded during a call that came at 6 a.m. on a Saturday. I know I said 25, but I figured out a way to do it cheaper. Please, Mia. I'm running out of time. I was making coffee in my small kitchen, still in my pajamas, trying to summon the energy for my weekend volunteer shift at the community garden. Through my window, I could see other people in my building starting their normal Saturday routines, walking dogs, carrying laundry, living lives that didn't revolve around other people's emergencies. Elena, my answer hasn't changed. But 15 is better than 25, right? It's more reasonable. It's still $15,000 I don't have. You do have it, though. I've seen your bank statements. The casual violation of my privacy should have shocked me, but somehow it didn't. Of course, she'd seen my bank statements, probably during one of the times she'd borrowed my laptop, or when I'd helped her organize her own finances. My mistake had been trusting her with information she'd filed away as a future resource. Having money and being able to spend it are different things. God, Mia, listen to yourself. You sound like Mom when she talks about being practical and, quote, living within your means. You're 26 years old. When are you going to start actually living? The accusation stung because there was truth in it. I did sound like Mom. Cautious, conservative, always planning for disasters that might never come. But I'd learned that approach from watching our family's financial crises, from being the one who had to solve them when everyone else's optimism crashed into reality. I am living. I'm just living responsibly. You're existing, not living. There's a difference. After she hung up, I sat in my kitchen for a long time, coffee growing cold in my hands. Was she right? Had my careful financial planning become a cage that kept me from experiencing anything meaningful? When was the last time I'd taken a risk, made an impulse purchase, or done something purely for joy rather than necessity? But then I remembered the relief I felt every month when I could pay my bills without stress, the security of knowing I could handle an emergency without asking anyone for help. That had to count for something. The calls continued through the weekend, each one slightly different in approach but identical in purpose. Elena tried reason, emotion, guilt, and finally, anger. She reminded me of every time she'd helped me, a list that was surprisingly short and mostly consisted of introductions to people who might hire me for freelance work. I got you the Morrison wedding, she said during Sunday night's call. That was $800 you wouldn't have had otherwise. You gave them my number. I did the work. I recommended you. That's worth something. It's worth a thank you, not $15,000. By Monday, Elena had stopped calling me directly. Instead, I got a call from Mom. Honey, Elena told me about her situation, Mom said, her voice carrying that careful neutrality she used when she didn't want to take sides but definitely had an opinion. It sounds really difficult. I was at my desk at Bridge Communities, reviewing applications for our after-school program. Around me, my coworkers were having normal Monday morning conversations about weekend plans and upcoming deadlines. Their problems seemed manageable, containable, not the kind that required other people to liquidate their life savings. It is difficult, I agreed, but it's not my difficult to solve. She's your sister, Mia. I know who she is, Mom. She's worked so hard to build her business. It would be such a shame to see it fail over something like this. Something like this. As if Elena's contractor problems were a natural disaster, rather than the predictable result of cutting corners and poor planning. As if my refusal to bail her out was equally responsible for the potential failure. Maybe failure would teach her something, I said, immediately regretting the harshness in my voice. Mom was quiet for a moment. That's not like you, sweetheart. You've always been so supportive of family. Supportive. The word felt loaded with expectation and history. I had been supportive. With my savings account, my time, my silence about where Elena's success had really come from. But somehow, the moment I stopped supporting, I became the problem. I've been supportive for 7 years, Mom. Maybe it's time for Elena to support herself. She's trying to. But sometimes we all need help. She's not asking for help, she's asking for a bailout. There's a difference. After Mom hung up, I tried to focus on work, but my concentration was shot. I kept thinking about that word, supportive. When had my family's definition of support become synonymous with financial rescue? When had saying no become equivalent to letting people down? That evening, Dad called. "Mia, we need to talk." His voice had the authority it carried when I was 16 and had missed curfew. "This situation with Elena has gone too far." "I agree." "Good. So you'll help her." "No, I mean her situation has gone too far. Her spending, her business practices, her assumption that other people will always clean up her mistakes. That's enough." The sharpness in his voice made me feel like a child again, small and powerless. "Elena made one bad decision about a contractor. That doesn't make her irresponsible." "One bad decision?" "Dad, I've been covering her bad decisions for 7 years." "You've been helping family. There's nothing wrong with that. There's something wrong with it being only in one direction." He was quiet for a moment, and I could hear Mom's voice in the background, though I couldn't make out the words. "Your mother and I are disappointed in you," he said finally. "We raised you to care about family, to understand that we support each other. Elena has always been there for you." When has Elena been there for me?" "She introduced you to clients. She helped you network when you were starting your career." "She gave people my phone number, Dad. That's not the same as being there." "It's enough, Mia. You'll figure out a way to help your sister, or this family is going to have a serious problem." The threat hung in the air between us, unspoken but clear. Help Elena, or face the consequences of being the daughter who let the family down. The one who chose money over love, selfishness over solidarity. After he hung up, I sat in my apartment's growing darkness, not bothering to turn on the lights. Outside, Portland's evening traffic hummed past my window, people heading home to their own families and their own problems. I thought about Elena's business failing, about the disappointment in my parents' voices, about being the person who could have prevented a disaster but chose not to. The guilt was real and heavy, sitting in my chest like a stone. But underneath the guilt was something else, a small, stubborn spark of anger. Anger at being manipulated, at having my financial security treated as a family resource, at being called selfish for wanting to protect the future I'd worked so hard to build. For the first time in 7 years, I was going to let Elena figure it out on her own, even if it meant becoming the villain in my family's story. Even if it meant learning whether their love for me was conditional on my usefulness. The phone rang again. Elena's name lit up the screen. I turned off the phone and went to bed. 3 weeks passed in relative silence. I didn't hear from Elena, and for the first time in years, my phone felt light in my pocket. No late-night crisis calls. No urgent text messages about bounced checks or overdue payments. Just normal life, work, evening classes for my master's degree, weekend volunteer shifts at the community garden. I started sleeping better. The constant low-level anxiety that had hummed in the background of my daily life began to fade, replaced by something I'd almost forgotten: peace. My savings account remained untouched, my budget stayed on track, and slowly, I began to remember what it felt like to make plans without wondering if I'd have to cancel them for someone else's emergency. Then, on a Tuesday evening in October, I came home from my organizational psychology class to find Elena sitting on the steps of my apartment building. She looked different, thinner, with dark circles under her eyes and an expensive handbag that I recognized as new. Her hair was freshly highlighted, and she wore a wool coat that probably cost more than my monthly rent. The contrast between her appearance of success and the desperation in her posture was jarring. "We need to talk," she said, standing up as I approached. "How did you get into the building?" "Mrs. Peterson from 3B let me in. I told her I was your sister, and that it was important." I fumbled with my keys, tired from a long day and unprepared for whatever conversation Elena had been rehearsing while sitting on those steps. You could have called. You've been ignoring my calls. I've been busy. She followed me up the stairs to my apartment, her heels clicking against the worn linoleum. Inside, I set down my backpack and turned to face her, not bothering to offer her a seat or something to drink. This wasn't a social visit. I saved the business, Elena announced without preamble. Congratulations. I found another way to get the money. Marcus took out a loan against his marketing firm, and I negotiated a payment plan with the new contractor. The Hartwell project is back on track. I waited for her to continue, knowing there was more. Elena didn't make house calls to share good news. But now Marcus and I are in serious debt. The monthly payments on his loan are more than we can handle, especially with the mortgage on the new house. She sat down on my couch without invitation, crossing her legs and adopting the posture she used during client presentations. We need help with the payments, just for a few months, until some of my other projects pay out. The audacity was breathtaking. She'd found another way to get the money I'd refused to give her, and now she wanted me to help pay for that solution. It was Elena at her most essential, taking what she needed from whoever would give it and somehow making it everyone else's responsibility to manage the consequences. How much? $2,000 a month. Marcus's loan payment is $3,500, but we can cover some of it ourselves. $2,000 a month. More than my rent, more than I spent on groceries and utilities combined. For a few months, that would inevitably stretch into a year or more, because Elena's projects always took longer to pay out than she expected. Elena, I can't afford $2,000 a month. You can afford it more than we can. Marcus might lose his business if we can't make the payments. And if Marcus's business fails, we'll lose the house, and then everything we've built together will be gone. The logic was flawlessly circular. Elena's crisis had created Marcus's crisis, which had created a joint crisis that was somehow now my crisis to solve. Their house, their business, their financial choices, all of it was being presented as my responsibility. Why didn't you think about this before Marcus took out the loan? We did think about it. We thought you'd eventually come around and help. We thought family meant something to you. There it was again. Family as emotional blackmail, love as obligation. The implication that my refusal to subsidize their lifestyle was a moral failing rather than a reasonable boundary. Family does mean something to me, but it doesn't mean I'm responsible for everyone else's financial decisions. Elena's composed facade began to crack. God, Mia, when did you become so cold? You used to care about people, you used to want to help. I still want to help. But I've been helping for 7 years, and it's never enough. Every crisis I solve just creates room for the next one. That's not true, isn't it? Tell me the last time you thanked me for anything. Tell me the last time you paid me back. Tell me the last time you asked how I was doing before asking for money. She was quiet for a moment, her eyes shifting around my apartment, as if looking for evidence to support her argument. They landed on my laptop, still open on the coffee table from when I'd been working on an assignment before class. You're studying for your master's degree, she said, as if this proved something. You have time and money for your own education, but you won't help your sister keep her business. I'm studying at night, Elena. After working full-time at a nonprofit that pays me barely enough to cover my expenses. My master's degree is costing me $1,200 a semester, which I've saved for over 2 years. $1,200. That's less than what I'm asking for 1 month. It's also money I've earned and budgeted for something that matters to me. And my business doesn't matter? Your business matters to you. My education matters to me. The difference is, I'm not asking you to pay for it. Elena stood up abruptly, her composure finally fracturing completely. Fine, be selfish. Let Marcus lose everything he's worked for, because you're too scared to spend money on anything that doesn't directly benefit you. I'm not scared to spend money. I'm tired of spending it on problems that aren't mine to solve. We're family. Our problems are your problems. No, they're not. The words came out more forcefully than I'd intended, but I didn't take them back. Your problems are your problems, Elena. And my money is my money. I've been confused about that for 7 years, but I'm not confused anymore. She stared at me like I'd grown a second head. Mom and Dad are going to be so disappointed when they hear about this. They're already disappointed. You made sure of that 3 weeks ago. This is different. This time, Marcus might lose his business. This time, there are real consequences. There were always real consequences. They just weren't consequences you had to face. Elena grabbed her expensive handbag and headed for the door, her wool coat swishing behind her like armor. In the doorway, she turned back one more time. I hope it's worth it, she said. I hope your precious savings account keeps you warm at night, because you're about to find out what it's like to not have a family. After she left, I deadbolted the door and sank into my couch, emotionally exhausted. The apartment felt different, quieter, but also emptier. For a moment, I wondered if I'd made a terrible mistake. Maybe family did mean sacrificing your own security for other people's dreams. Maybe love was supposed to be measured in dollars transferred and crises averted. But then I looked at my laptop, still open to the essay I'd been writing about community resilience and sustainable support systems. I thought about the families I worked with at Bridge Communities, people who helped each other without destroying themselves, who understood the difference between temporary assistance and permanent dependence. I thought about the master's degree I was earning one evening class at a time, the future I was building with careful planning and delayed gratification. I thought about the woman I wanted to become, and whether she was someone who enabled other people's poor choices or someone who modeled healthy boundaries. For the first time in 7 years, I'd chosen myself. It felt terrifying and liberating in equal measure. My phone buzzed with a text from Elena. Last chance. Marcus is meeting with bankruptcy lawyers tomorrow. I deleted the message without responding and went back to my essay. The manila envelope arrived on a gray November morning, thick and official looking in my small mailbox. My name was typed across the front in formal lettering that made my stomach clench before I'd even opened it. Inside, I found papers with summons printed across the top in bold letters, and Elena's signature at the bottom of a document claiming I had defrauded her business through predatory lending practices and emotional manipulation. I sat in my car outside the post office, reading the same paragraphs over and over. According to Elena's attorney, I had, quote, exploited her emotional vulnerability during times of crisis to, quote, create an unfair business arrangement that gave me unwarranted control over Gilded Interiors. The lawsuit claimed I had used my position as her sister to manipulate her into agreements she didn't understand, and that my recent refusal to provide additional funding was an attempt to destroy her livelihood through economic coercion. The final paragraph requested damages of $50,000 plus attorney fees. My hands were shaking by the time I finished reading. $50,000. More money than I'd ever had at one time, more than my apartment was worth, more than I could pay even if I liquidated everything I owned. But more than the money, it was the betrayal that left me breathless. Elena was claiming I had manipulated her, when the truth was exactly the opposite. I called in sick to work and spent the morning pacing my apartment, rereading the lawsuit documents, and trying to understand how helping my sister had somehow become grounds for legal action. The Elena described in these papers, victimized, naive, taken advantage of by her predatory sister, bore no resemblance to the Elena who had called me at midnight demanding money, or who had casually mentioned seeing my bank statements, or who had threatened me with family exile when I finally said no. But maybe that was the point. Maybe this was Elena's version of the truth, where she was always the victim and I was always the villain. Maybe she'd convinced herself that my loans had been manipulative rather than generous, that my silence about repayment had been calculated rather than considerate. I needed a lawyer, but lawyers cost money I didn't have, especially if I might owe $50,000 at the end of this process. I spent the afternoon researching legal aid services and trying to understand the difference between civil and criminal court, feeling overwhelmed by a system I'd never expected to navigate. That evening, my friend Sarah from Bridge Communities called with the name of an attorney who sometimes did pro bono work for nonprofit employees. Janet Morrison, Sarah said. She's tough but fair, and she has experience with family disputes. Tell her I referred you. Janet Morrison's office was in a converted house in southeast Portland, with plants in the windows and legal texts stacked on every available surface. She was in her 50s with gray streaked hair and the direct manner of someone who had seen every variation of human conflict. "Show me what you have," she said after I'd explained the situation. I spread the lawsuit documents across her desk, then opened the folder I'd prepared: bank records, email chains, the few text messages I'd saved over the years. Janet read through everything methodically, occasionally asking questions about dates or amounts. "Do you have any written agreements about repayment terms?" she asked. No. Everything was verbal. Elena always said she'd pay me back when things got better, or when the next project came through. Any witnesses to these conversations? Sometimes our parents were around, but I don't think they paid attention to the details. Janet leaned back in her chair, studying me with the calculating look of someone trying to determine if I was telling the truth. "Your sister is claiming you manipulated her into these loans. Is there any basis for that claim?" I never pressured her to take money from me. If anything, I usually tried to talk her out of it first. "But you did keep track of everything." She gestured to my folder of records. "Bank transfers, amounts, dates. That suggests some level of expectation about repayment." "I keep track of all my finances. It's how I budget." "And you never formally requested repayment?" I figured she'd pay me back when she could. I didn't want to make it awkward. Janet was quiet for a moment, flipping through my bank records. "How much total are we talking about?" I'd done the math so many times I knew it by heart. $18,400. Over 7 years. "And your sister's business. Is it successful?" "She acts like it is. New car, expensive clothes, nice house. But she's always having cash flow problems." Janet closed the folder and looked at me directly. "Here's what I think happened. Your sister got into a financial hole that she couldn't dig out of. Rather than take responsibility for her business practices, she's decided to make you the villain. She's probably convinced herself that your help over the years was somehow unfair, because the alternative is admitting that she's been irresponsible with money. The assessment was harsh but accurate. So what do? We fight it. This lawsuit is what we call creative fiction. There's no legal basis for claiming that informal family loans constitute fraud or manipulation, but we'll need to document everything, and it's going to take time and money." "How much money?" "I can do this for $1,500, if you're willing to do most of the paperwork yourself. We'll file a motion to dismiss based on lack of merit, and if that doesn't work, we'll prepare for trial. But honestly, I don't think it will get that far. Your sister's attorney probably knows this is a weak case. $1,500. Another unexpected expense, another chunk of my carefully managed budget redirected to solve problems I didn't create. But the alternative was potentially losing $50,000, not to mention the damage to my credit and reputation if Elena won. "Okay," I said. "Let's do it." Over the next 2 weeks, I spent my evenings at Janet's office, organizing documents and preparing statements. We pulled together bank records, email chains, and a timeline of every financial transaction between Elena and me. The pattern was clear and consistent. Elena asked for help, I provided it, she promised to pay me back, and then the debt was quietly forgotten until the next crisis arose. "This is actually a strong case for you," Janet said during one of our evening sessions. "If your sister had left well enough alone, she might have gotten away with never repaying these loans. But by filing this lawsuit, she's created a legal record of the debt. We can countersue for the full amount plus interest." The idea of countersuing felt both appealing and exhausting. I just want this to be over. I understand. But sometimes you have to fight back to make people understand there are consequences for their actions. The hearing was scheduled for the week before Thanksgiving. Elena showed up wearing a charcoal suit that probably cost more than my car, accompanied by an attorney who looked like he specialized in intimidating people in small claims court. They sat on the opposite side of the courtroom, Elena staring straight ahead while her lawyer shuffled papers and whispered occasional comments. I wore my best interview outfit, a navy blazer I'd bought at a consignment shop and black pants that were comfortable enough to sit in for hours. Janet sat beside me, calm and prepared, with our carefully organized evidence in matching folders. When Elena's attorney stood to present her case, he painted a picture of a naive young businesswoman taken advantage of by her calculating sister. He claimed I had used emotional manipulation and family pressure to create predatory loan arrangements that Elena didn't fully understand. He suggested that my careful record-keeping proved I had planned to use these debts as leverage against my sister's business. It was a compelling story, and for a moment I wondered if the judge might actually believe it. But then Janet stood up. She didn't embellish or dramatize. She simply presented the facts. 18 documented requests for financial help, 18 transfers from my account to Elena's, 0 payments in return. She showed email chains where Elena promised repayment and then asked for additional loans. She presented evidence of Elena's lifestyle and business expenses, demonstrating that inability to repay was not the same as inability to pay. Your Honor, Janet concluded, this is not a case of predatory lending. This is a case of family generosity being taken for granted, and when that generosity was finally withdrawn, the defendant chose to blame the plaintiff rather than take responsibility for her own financial decisions. The judge looked unimpressed with Elena's attorney's arguments. Motion to dismiss granted, he said after less than 10 minutes of deliberation. Furthermore, given the evidence presented, I'm awarding the plaintiff's legal fees and authorizing a counterclaim for the full amount of the documented loans. Just like that, it was over. Elena owed me $18,400 plus my attorney fees, plus interest. The debt that had been invisible for 7 years was now officially recognized by the state of Oregon. Outside the courthouse, Elena was waiting by the steps, her attorney already gone. Her composed facade had finally cracked completely, and she looked smaller somehow, diminished by the public recognition of what she'd tried to deny. I hope you're happy, she said as I walked past. You got your money. I stopped and turned back to face her. I never wanted to take you to court, Elena. You did that. You could have just helped us with the loan payments. This all could have been avoided. Even now, even after losing a lawsuit based on her own ridiculous claims, she still couldn't see it. In Elena's world, I was still the villain for refusing to enable her financial irresponsibility. No, I said quietly. This could have been avoided if you'd ever said thank you. If you'd ever paid me back. If you'd ever treated me like family instead of like a bank. I walked away without waiting for her response. Behind me, I could hear her calling my name, but I didn't turn around. The conversation was over, and so was the relationship that had defined so much of my adult life. For the first time in 7 years, I was free. The silence that followed the courthouse steps felt different from all the silences that had come before. This one wasn't heavy with unspoken resentment or thick with family tension. It was clean, like the air after a thunderstorm, and for the first time in years, I could breathe deeply without wondering when the next crisis would steal my breath away. The weeks after the hearing passed quietly. No late-night phone calls. No emergency text messages. No family interventions, designed to make me feel guilty for protecting my own interests. My parents didn't call to lecture me about family loyalty, and Elena didn't appear on my doorstep with new disasters that required my immediate financial attention. At first, the silence felt strange. For 7 years, my phone had been a source of constant anxiety. Every ring, potentially another request for money. Every text message, possibly another crisis that would drain my savings account. Now my phone was just a phone, and my evenings were mine to fill with schoolwork, reading, or simply sitting quietly without waiting for someone else's emergency to reshape my day. I used the quiet time to focus on finishing my master's degree. Without the constant interruption of Elena's financial crises, I found I could concentrate on my studies in a way that had been impossible before. My thesis project, a community resilience program for at-risk families, began to take shape, informed by my own experience with unhealthy family dynamics and unsustainable support systems. 3 months after the hearing, I received a check in the mail, $18,400, plus interest and legal fees. Elena had paid the court-ordered judgment without contest, probably on the advice of her attorney. The check was accompanied by no note, no explanation, no acknowledgement of what the money represented or what its absence had cost me over the years. I deposited the check and sat in my car in the bank parking lot, staring at my account balance on my phone screen. For the first time since I was 21, I had real financial security. Enough money for a house down payment, or graduate school, or simply the peace of mind that came from knowing I could handle whatever emergencies life might bring without asking anyone else for help. That evening, I did something I hadn't done in years. I bought myself something expensive and impractical. A painting from a local artist whose work I'd admired in coffee shops and galleries, but never thought I could afford. It was abstract, all blues and greens that reminded me of the Oregon coast, and it cost more than I usually spent on groceries in 2 months. I hung it above my couch and sat looking at it for a long time, marveling at how different it felt to spend money on something that brought me joy, rather than something that solved someone else's problem. The painting was mine, bought with money I'd earned and saved and finally gotten back, and nobody could take it away or diminish its value by forgetting how I'd acquired it. Spring arrived early that year, and with it came an unexpected opportunity. Dr. Martinez, my thesis advisor, recommended me for a position with a foundation that funded community development projects across the Pacific Northwest. The job would mean traveling, working with grassroots organizations, and helping communities build sustainable support systems. Everything I'd been studying and dreaming about for years. The position requires someone who understands both fiscal responsibility and community dynamics, Dr. Martinez explained during our meeting. Someone who can help organizations create healthy boundaries while still maintaining their mission of service. Your thesis work makes you an ideal candidate. The interview process was rigorous, involving presentations, case studies, and meetings with board members who asked tough questions about community accountability and sustainable funding models. But I found myself answering with confidence I didn't know I possessed, drawing on experiences that had once felt like personal failures, but now seemed like hard-won expertise. You have an unusual perspective on family systems and financial codependency, one board member noted. Where does that insight come from? Personal experience, I said simply. I've learned the difference between helping people and enabling them, and I understand how good intentions can sometimes create unhealthy dependencies. I got the job. My last day at Bridge Communities was bittersweet. I'd spent 4 years there, learning about nonprofit management and community organizing, while navigating my own family's dysfunction. My coworkers threw me a small farewell party, and Sarah presented me with a card signed by all the families I'd worked with over the years. "You taught us that boundaries aren't walls," one mother had written. "They're bridges that help us walk toward each other with respect." The words made me cry, because they captured something I'd struggled to understand about my own life. I hadn't built walls to keep my family out. I'd simply stopped pretending that love required me to solve everyone else's problems at the expense of my own well-being. On my birthday that year, I was in Eastern Oregon, visiting a rural community that was developing a mutual aid network for farm families facing economic hardship. I spent the day interviewing organizers and reviewing budget proposals, work that felt meaningful in a way my previous job never had. That evening, as I sat in my hotel room writing up my notes, my phone buzzed with a text message. For a moment, my old anxiety flared. Had something gone wrong with one of my projects? Was there a crisis that needed my immediate attention? But the message was from Mom. "Happy birthday, sweetheart. I'm proud of the woman you've become." 8 words. No request for money, no guilt about family obligations, no mention of Elena or the lawsuit or the years of financial manipulation that had finally been acknowledged and resolved. Just a mother telling her daughter she was proud. I stared at the message for a long time, remembering the birthday texts from previous years that had been immediately followed by requests to help with this crisis or that emergency. This text stood alone, complete in itself, asking nothing and offering something I'd almost forgotten I wanted. Recognition. I texted back, "Thank you, Mom. That means a lot." 6 months later, I was invited to speak at a conference for nonprofit professionals about creating healthy organizational boundaries and sustainable funding practices. The audience was filled with executive directors and program managers who struggled with the same issues I'd once faced in my personal life. How to help people without enabling dependency. How to maintain support systems without burning out the supporters. The most generous thing you can do for someone, I told the room, is to help them develop their own capacity for problem solving, rather than solving their problems for them. And the most generous thing you can do for yourself is to recognize when your help has become enabling. During the Q&A, a woman in the front row asked, "How do you know when you've crossed the line from helping to enabling?" I thought about Elena, about the years of midnight phone calls and emergency transfers, and promises of repayment that never materialized. I thought about the court hearing where she'd tried to make me the villain for finally saying no. When your help consistently prevents someone from experiencing the natural consequences of their choices, I said, you're probably enabling. And when someone treats your generosity as an entitlement rather than a gift, it's time to reassess the relationship. After the conference, several people approached me with their own stories of financial manipulation by family members, workplace exploitation disguised as loyalty, and the guilt that came with setting boundaries with people who claimed to love them. Their stories were different in detail but identical in structure. Generous people who had been taught that love meant self-sacrifice, and who had learned too late that some people would take everything offered without ever offering anything in return. "How did you find the strength to stop?" one woman asked. "How did you get past the guilt?" I realized that protecting my ability to help others sustainably was more important than solving one person's problems temporarily, I said. And I learned that people who truly love you don't want your help to come at the cost of your own well-being. A year after the lawsuit was settled, Elena and I encountered each other at a coffee shop in downtown Portland. I was meeting with a community organizer about a grant proposal, and she was apparently meeting with a potential client. We saw each other across the room, and for a moment, neither of us moved. Finally, she approached my table, looking uncertain for the first time in our adult relationship. "Mia," she said quietly, "could we talk? Just for a minute?" I gestured to the empty chair across from me, and she sat down carefully, as if she wasn't sure she was welcome. "I wanted to apologize," she said, not meeting my eyes. "For the lawsuit. For everything. I was scared and angry, and I blamed you for problems that weren't your fault." The apology felt genuine, but incomplete. "What changed?" "Marcus left me." She said it matter-of-factly, as if discussing the weather. "He said I had no idea how to manage money or take responsibility for my choices. He said living with me was like being married to a teenager who expected everyone else to be the adults." I didn't respond immediately, processing this information and trying to decide how I felt about it. "The business is struggling," Elena continued. "Without the monthly payments you used to make, and without Marcus's loan payments, I've had to downsize everything. I moved back in with Mom and Dad." "I'm sorry to hear that," I said, and meant it. I didn't want Elena to suffer. I just wanted her to take responsibility for her own choices. "I understand now why you said no," she said, finally looking at me directly. "I understand that I was asking too much, and that I never gave you anything back. I understand that I treated you like a resource instead of a person." The admission hung between us, honest and painful. "I don't expect us to go back to how things were," she continued. "I just wanted you to know that I finally get it. You weren't being selfish. You were being sane." After she left, I sat in the coffee shop for a long time, thinking about forgiveness and family, and the difference between understanding someone and enabling them. Elena's apology felt real, but I also knew that apologizing was easier than changing, and that people often said they understood when what they really meant was that they were sorry they'd been caught. But for the first time in years, I felt something like hope for my sister. Not hope that we'd return to our old relationship. That dynamic had been toxic for both of us, but hope that she might finally learn to solve her own problems and build relationships based on mutual respect rather than financial dependency. I never became wealthy and I never became famous, but I became something more valuable. I became free. Free from the anxiety of other people's emergencies. Free from the guilt of saying no to unreasonable requests. Free from the weight of carrying everyone else's problems while neglecting my own dreams. Most importantly, I learned that the greatest gift you can give someone isn't your money or your time or your endless availability for their crises. The greatest gift you can give someone is the expectation that they're capable of solving their own problems and the space to prove you right. My name is Mia, and this is my story of learning that love doesn't require self-destruction, and that the word no can be the most generous thing you ever say.